I see you.
Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I moved into the rental home. It was a tiny location outside of the city. It was the ideal area for someone like me who had recently experienced a difficult breakup and needed time to reflect, with houses spaced widely apart and everyone keeping to themselves. The last tenant abruptly left mid-lease, according to the landlord, but he didn't appear to care. I just mentioned an out-of-state work opportunity. There was a huge oak tree in the rear of the house. I'm referring to ancient branches that, on windy nights, scraped against the window of my bedroom. In fact, I thought it was lovely throughout the day, the way the orange and crimson leaves let in the autumn sun. That first week, though, I did notice something minor that I maybe ought to have taken notice of more. A massive clump of leaves would fall from that tree every day at precisely 300 p.m. not slowly, like leaves often do over the day. Suddenly, as if the branches had been shook, there would be a rustling sound coming from my desk while I was working from home, and when I looked out the window, there in the quiet afternoon air, dozens of leaves would spiral downward in this cascade. It occurred at the same time every day around 300 p.m. It was surely something natural, I assured myself. Perhaps it had to do with variations in temperature or wind patterns that I didn't comprehend. However, I found it bothersome, particularly since there would be very few leaves falling over the remainder of the day. On my 10th day there, the first really strange incident occurred. Around 2:45, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee. I saw someone standing at the edge of my backyard at p.m. Despite the pleasant weather, a middle-aged man is dressed in a black jacket. He was standing at the tree line where my property and the woods intersected, staring at my house without moving. I initially assumed he was a neighbor who wanted to introduce himself. I even tentatively waved my hand up. He did not return the wave. He remained still. And even at that distance, I could sense his gaze on me and the house. My pulse began to race as I watched him for perhaps 2 minutes, unsure of whether I should approach him to see if he needed anything. The leaves then fell in that same abrupt cascade at precisely 300 p.m. and he was gone as soon as I looked up at the sound, simply disappeared into the trees. I attempted to explain it. Perhaps he paused to rest while out on a walk with his dog. Perhaps his eyes had been on something else, and I could only image how intense his gaze was. But there was no dog in the backyard, which I inspected from every window in the house. There was no indication that anyone had visited. I checked all the locks again that night. The following afternoon, I created a point at 2:30 p.m. to keep an eye on the backyard. With my phone in hand, I stood by the kitchen window, prepared to call someone, though I wasn't sure who if necessary. The dude never showed up. However, when the leaves started to fall at 300 p.m., I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Fresh tracks were visible in the leaves, tracing a path from the woods to a location right beneath my bedroom window and back again. No one had been in sight. Those prints hadn't shown before 300 p.m., but I had been monitoring the entire time. After 30 minutes of staring at that yard, the leaf cover had not changed. I stepped outdoors to observe them. They were big boot prints, most likely the size of a man's. They paused directly beneath my window, where a person would have been waiting if they were interested in peering inside. I was ill. The drapes in my bedroom were thin. In there, I had been sleeping and changing clothes. I assumed I had privacy there, going about my life. I ought to have made a call at that time. However, who was it called? How would I respond? that a man spent 2 minutes standing at the edge of my property and that footprints were left behind. On paper, none of it was dangerous. I would come out as suspicious. Rather, I went to the hardware shop and purchased a motion-activated light for the garden, as well as heavy drapes. At 2:52 a.m., the motion light went out. That evening, my heart pounded against my ribs as I jolted to consciousness. I reached for my phone and drew back the new curtain's corner, just enough to give a glimpse. There was nobody in the backyard. For its allotted 60 seconds, the light remained on, illuminating only the oak tree and the leaf mat underneath. Then it became dark. I spent the remainder of the night awake. I worked from a coffee shop the following day. I was unable to endure spending the afternoon at the house, waiting till 3:00 p.m., and whatever might accompany it was intolerable. But eventually, I had to return home. Just in front of my door, on my front porch, I saw a neatly placed mound of leaves. When I came into my driveway at 4:30 p.m., a breeze was blowing. The foliage on the lawn was haphazardly and spontaneously dispersed. However, these were purposefully arranged to form a perfect circle with a circumference of roughly 2 feet. There was a tiny stone in the middle of the circle that I couldn't identify. Before I swept it away, I snapped a photo using my phone. My hands are trembling. Why I brushed it away is beyond me. Perhaps I simply wanted it removed, wanted to act as though it hadn't existed. I hurled the stone as forcefully as I could toward the forest. I began searching for the house's address on Google that night in an attempt to find any news stories or historical information. There was nothing. The landlord had only provided me with the former tenant's first name, which was so common that it was of little value to me. The closest house was a quarter of a mile away, so I thought about asking the neighbors, and for some reason, rather than making me feel less vulnerable, the thought of strolling along that deserted road at dusk increased my vulnerability. The motion light turned out once more at 2:47 a.m. this time. I looked at myself. I have to be aware. In order to remain hidden in the room's darkness, I slipped over to the window and quietly pulled the curtain aside. Someone was standing beneath the oak tree. I was unable to glimpse their face. They were completely still, with their backs facing the house, and dressed in black attire. They did not move for the full 60 seconds while the light was on. The darkness engulfed them when the light went out. I held my phone tightly, ready to contact 911, and waited, not breathing. The light did not turn on once more. I heard a faint sound against the window of my bedroom about 3:17 a.m. It was a soft touch of fingertips moving along the glass. Neither a tap nor a knock. I didn't check. I was unable to make myself appear. Until the sun rose, I sat in the dark in my bed with my back against the headboard. The window had no markings or footprints in the morning. I got to work packing. I informed the landlord that I had to terminate the lease due to a family emergency. He was nearly relieved and unexpectedly understanding. He made no inquiries. He seems unsurprised. 3 days later, I left the boxes and furniture behind and moved out, taking only what I could fit in my car. I didn't give a damn. All I had to do was get out. It has now been 2 months. I've moved to a bright flat in the city with visibility from streetlights and neighbors on all sides. Here, I convince myself I'm safe, that whatever was going on has ended. However, on my lunch break last week, I was strolling in the park when I noticed an oak tree that made me think of the one in that backyard. I paused briefly to look at the time on my phone. This was at 2:59 p.m., precisely 3 o'clock. I watched as a stream of leaves suddenly dropped from the tree in the quiet air. A figure in a dark jacket was standing on the opposite side of the tree, partially obscured by the trunk. If they were observing me, I didn't wait to find out. I simply walked quickly back to my office, where I was surrounded by people, commotion, and safety. However, I can't get it out of my head. It might have been a coincidence. Different guy, different tree. Perhaps I'm just seeing patterns where none exist now because I'm paranoid. The man in the backyard might have been a neighbor, strange and awkward, but in the end, innocuous. Perhaps those were old footprints that I had missed. Perhaps it was just a branch making the noise near my window. However, I don't think so, because I discovered a tiny stone yesterday on the balcony of my 4-story apartment. It's the same stone that I flung into the woods 2 months ago. I'm positive it is. Its smooth surface and uneven form are same. Additionally, at 2:45 every afternoon, I find myself waiting and looking outside my window, wondering if I'll see that figure again today. Pondering their desires, I wonder why I was selected. The leaves are now completely gone. Fall is finished. However, I occasionally hear a gentle brushing sound against my window late at night, and I never ever look. In late September, just as the weather had cooled down enough to make exercise enjoyable rather than debilitating, I began to walk the trail behind my house. Before turning around, the trail went through a brief, perhaps half-mile long, wooded area. It was just a well-worn dirt route that the people had been using for years. It was neither official or maintained by the township or anything. In fact, it was serene and lovely at the height of October, when the leaves were changing to vivid shades of orange and red. Every night after work, I would go there, usually at 6:30 p.m, when the light was beginning to go down, but there was still enough sunlight coming through the trees to see well. After 8 hours of staring, it became my ritual and my method of unwinding. In front of displays, I would put on my earplugs, take a stroll, and listen to podcasts. I seldom ever saw anyone else. I might see another jogger or a dog walker once or twice a week. We would simply nod courteously to one another. Early in October, I became aware of something strange for the first time. About halfway through my stroll, I noticed a man standing perhaps 20 feet into the trees, off the trail. He was directing his camera into the trees. It was one of those large, professional cameras with a long lens. I assumed he was taking pictures of wildlife, birds, or the changing foliage. It made sense to use a nature photographer. However, when I passed by, I had the odd impression that the camera had been aimed at me. At the trail, after I had gone another 30 feet, I looked back, and he had turned to see me leave. He was standing there observing, not the camera, as if he had been taking pictures of birds all along. He raised the camera once again and aimed it into the canopy when he noticed me turning around. I said I was being paranoid myself. He had most likely been observing the trees, and I had simply happened to catch him at a strange time. People take pictures of leaves in the fall. It's typical. However, he returned the following evening, the same man and camera, but in a different location, possibly 100 yards down the trail. He was kneeling next to the path this time, and as I got closer, he got up and moved back into the trees, making room for me to go. Courteous and typical. However, his camera was aimed down the path in the direction from which I had come, as if he had been taking pictures of the deserted road. His face was blurry to me both times. He kept his eyes down or behind the camera, and he had a baseball cap pulled down. He was taller than normal, had a lean body, and was dressed in dark outdoor attire, but I couldn't even tell you how old he was. My earbuds were at home on the third night. If somebody was around, I wanted to hear them. I was glad he wasn't on the trail that day. Perhaps I had been suspicious. Perhaps he had just completed a brief assignment about the fall season as a photographer. I allowed myself to unwind as I strolled, taking in the sound of the wind rustling the branches and the crunch of the leaves beneath my feet. I then heard a camera shutter about 3/4 of the way through my loop. That characteristic burst mode click click click. It came from off to my left, deeper in the trees. I paused my stride and listened. A moment of silence, followed by another outburst. Click, 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 through the woods. I was unable to see anyone. My heart began to rush as I remained there for a whole minute, but I never heard it again. No rustling, no footsteps. I looked more over my shoulder than in front of me as I hurried the remainder of the way home. I attempted to look for any information about nearby photographers or photo projects on the internet that evening. Nothing. I looked via local social media groups and community forums. A photographer had not been named. No one had requested authorization to take pictures on the trail. Though I wasn't sure what to say, I considered posting something myself to see if anyone else had seen him. Is there a man with a camera out there? He may have photographed me as I walked. Even in my imagination, it seemed absurd. I altered my regimen for the following evening. Instead of going at 6:30, I went at 5 o'clock. I promised myself that if he was back, I would go up to him and ask him straight out what he was taking pictures of. At 5 p.m., he was not present. There was nobody on the trail. I felt silly for worrying so much as I ended my walk. However, I was horrified by what I saw when I arrived home and went around to my back door. At the point where the track left the woods, there were new boot prints in the soft ground close to the tree line. There'd been a figure facing my house, just off my property. The prints appeared to have been there for a long time, because they were deeply pressed. The prints wasn't there when I passed that location 10 minutes prior, so someone must have been there waiting for me to return while I was on the trail or immediately after watching my house. With trembling hands, I entered and shut the doors until the sun set and I was no longer able to see the boot prints. I stood at my kitchen window and gazed at them. Then I wondered whether anyone else was staring back at me as I gazed into the darkness outside my yard. For 3 days, I didn't walk the trail. I said I was merely taking a break and altering my routine because I was smart and not afraid. However, I continued to check the tree line and gaze out my back windows, but I never saw anyone. On the 4th day, I discovered a memory card on my front porch carefully positioned so it wouldn't fall other than in my mailbox or in front of my door. I'd be sure to see it tucked under the welcome mat's edge. The mini SD card was the type found in cameras. Just a card, no explanation, no note. I should not have looked at it. My gut prompted me to either throw it away or take it somewhere, show it to someone, or seek assistance. But I had to know, too. I had to comprehend what was going on. So I grabbed my laptop, opened the files, and plugged in a card reader. 43 pictures were included. They were all of me leaving and returning home, me standing at my kitchen window, me strolling the route from thousands of different perspectives. I was able to see my face through the glass of the last one, which was taken from the woods behind my house. In the majority of them, I didn't realize I was being filmed. Someone had been recording everything I did walking, thinking, and simply existing. The pictures had dates on them. They went back 5 weeks before I had ever noticed anything amiss, let alone seen him on the trail. It's difficult to put into words how I felt violated. It wasn't only that I was being watched, but that it had been done for a long time without my knowledge. And worse, this is what they wanted me to know. The memory card intended that, to inform me that I had been monitored. They decided to show me these pictures even though they could have kept them to themselves. To inform me that they could drop anything on my porch once they were close enough to my house. I sat there trembling, trying to make up my mind. After yanking the card out of my computer, I spent a lot of time considering and balancing my options. I'm not sure if the decision I took at the end was the right one. I totally altered my regimen. I gave up on the trail. I purchased blackout curtains for each window that faces the forest. Instead of parking in the driveway, I parked in the garage. I changed up my routine, arriving home in different ways and leaving for work at different times. I was watchful and cautious. The thing that keeps me up at night, though, is this. I was at the grocery shop, the one 10 miles from my house, that I had never been to before. 2 weeks after I discovered the memory card, I was attempting to choose between various apple varieties in the produce area when I sensed it. That feeling of being observed. I noticed him when I looked up and scanned the store, standing in the next aisle over, the same build, same baseball cap. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at cereal boxes. He didn't look in my direction. He didn't even realize I was there. Like any other customer, he simply stood there and looked at the store's inventory. It might not have been him. The fact that every tall man wearing a baseball cap suddenly resembles the one from the path may be the reason I'm so paranoid. Perhaps I'm making connections that don't exist and recognizing patterns where none exist. However, I abandoned my cart in the middle of the aisle, left the store, got into my car, and drove home while constantly glancing in my rearview mirror. I haven't walked the trail yet. I've begun to notice things, but I doubt I ever will again. 3 days in a row, the same vehicle parked on my street. When I check my mail, I feel like I'm being watched. Outside my bedroom window, there was a shuffling sound that could have been footsteps or leaves. I discovered another memory card last week. It was nestled beneath my windshield wiper this time. I have yet to examine it. I've got it on my kitchen table, but I'm afraid of what I'll discover if I plug it in. More pictures, recent ones, evidence that altering my regimen has no effect, that it didn't matter about the curtains, that my measures had no effect whatsoever. They might be pictures of me from that supermarket. Perhaps they are pictures of me asleep that were captured via a curtain gap. Perhaps those are pictures of me sitting at this table, looking at a memory card, and unsure of what to do. The worrying isn't the worst part. The ignorance is the problem. I have no idea who he is, what he desires, or why he picked me. I'm not sure if he's dangerous or just crazy. I'm not sure if I'll live my E or just crazy. I'm not sure if I'll live my E. On a Tuesday night in the middle of October, I saw her for the first time. I saw her strolling along the shoulder as I was using the back roads to escape traffic on my way home from work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a large brown coat that seemed excessively thick for the weather. Just a person heading home, most likely from the bus stop a mile away. Nothing noteworthy. It was becoming dark, and since I'm a woman traveling alone, and you hear stories, I decided against stopping to give her a lift. Instead, I drove past her and watched her in my rearview mirror until she vanished around the bend. It made me feel a little bad. It's a lengthy trek, particularly when the temperature drops in the dusk. I saw her again the following evening. The same brown coat, the same road, and the same direction of travel. If she was walking from the same starting position, it made plausible that she was perhaps a quarter of a mile further along than when I had last seen her. She must be walking home from work every day, I reasoned, since she must not own a car. As I walked past her, I experienced the same twinge of remorse, but I continued. It was now a part of my drive home by Friday. She would be there as I turned that corner, always strolling, always by herself, always in that brown coat. She never raised her head when a car went by, I noted. She remained concentrated on the road ahead, keeping her head down. I couldn't explain why, but something about that disturbed me. Exactly 1 week after I'd first seen her, on Tuesday of the following week, something shifted. I was leaving work 30 minutes later than usual since I was running late. With the exception of my headlights, the road was black and the sun had long set. I expected to see nothing when I turned the corner, but she was there. She was walking down the shoulder as though she had been waiting for me, in the same place and going in the same way. That didn't make logic, though. She should have been long gone by now if she had been walking from the bus stop. Else she had been standing there waiting for 30 minutes, or else she was walking from somewhere else. She kept her head down as I passed her, so I slowed down to try to see her face better. I saw her take steady, mechanical steps in the light of my taillights. Then the blackness engulfed her, and she was no longer visible in my reflection. I took her another, longer route home that weekend, avoiding that section of road completely. I justified it by saying that I wanted to check out a new coffee shop that I had heard good things about. I simply didn't want to see her again, though. There was something that had begun to feel off about the routine. The way she never arrived, always walked, and always stayed in the same spot. I did, however, see her on Monday. I was pulling my basket through the produce area of the grocery store when I looked down the aisle and saw her. The same dark ponytail and brown coat, stood motionless before the apples. She was just standing there looking straight ahead, not shopping, not analyzing the fruit, not checking pricing. For a split second, our eyes locked, and I felt a shiver go through me. After that, she turned and left, vanishing into the next aisle. I dropped my cart and went with it, but she was gone by the time I turned the corner. I looked in every aisle and even asked a staff member if she had seen the woman in the brown coat, but she seemed to have disappeared. I didn't buy anything before I went. She was walking on the road when I took my normal route home that evening. Same mechanical stride, same place. My hands were so tense on the steering wheel that my knuckles became white as I drove by in a few days. After that, I became more detail-oriented. Even though she reportedly walked on sandy roads every day, the coat never seemed dirty. Even on windy days, her ponytail was consistently immaculate, never a hair out of place, and most unnerving. She never appeared weary, stopped to rest, rearranged her suitcase, or took out a phone. Simply continued walking in the same direction indefinitely. I ran into her in the pharmacy at the beginning of November. She was seated on one of those plastic seats in the waiting area, staring at the wall as I picked up a prescription. The same brown coat, the same blank calm attitude, even though it was a mild enough day that I had left my jacket in the car. I was standing there looking at her while holding my prescription. She didn't blink or move. A full minute later, I approached and stood right in front of her. "Excuse me," I mentioned. My speech sounded unsteady. "Do I know you?" Slowly, as if waking from a dream, she glanced up at me. Upon closer inspection, I realized she was younger than I had assumed, possibly in her late 20s, and she was attractive in a forgettable way. If you were to walk past her on the street, you wouldn't recognize her face. "I doubt it," she answered. She spoke in a regular, nice, and quiet voice. "You remind me of someone I saw on Morton Road. You never stop walking." Her face flashed with something, not really recognition. "Another stuff," she answered. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I never go for a walk. I drive an automobile." She got up and left the pharmacy, and I observed through the window as she got into a sedan that was parked directly in front of me. She didn't turn around as she drove off. However, she was walking down Morton Road that evening when I came home from work. Her coat, location, and everything else were all the same. With my heart racing, I stopped in front of her and stepped out of my car. I was standing on the shoulder, anticipating her arrival. She continued to walk with that steady, robotic stride without slowing down or acknowledging me. "Hey," I shrieked. "Hey, I know I saw you today at the pharmacy." She went straight by me, not fast, not fleeing, but walking at the same steady pace. She didn't respond or even look at me. I didn't even seem to be there. "Stop," I yelled. "Just stop and talk to me." She continued to walk. I watched as she rounded the corner and vanished, her form getting smaller and smaller in the twilight. With trembling hands, I got back in my car and headed home. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I began to inquire. I stated at work that I saw a woman walking down Morton Road every day. According to one of my co-workers, she had never seen anyone walking that distance, and she also traveled that path daily. At the petrol station on Morton, I asked the cashier whether he knew who she was. He said he had never seen any ordinary pedestrians and gave me a weird look. However, I always saw her walking, always in the same direction, always between the same two spots on the road, never more than a quarter of a mile ahead, and never starting from a location I could recognize. I saw her every day and every evening. After that, I began to see her in various settings, like the library, where she was seated in front of a computer but wasn't typing, standing beneath a tree in the park, and the leaves rained down all around her. She was in line behind me at the coffee shop, and I could smell something odd and earthy on her coat like wet dirt. She would either deny it or vanish if I attempted to confront her. She would remark, "You have me confused with someone else," or she would simply disappear into a crowd or walk away. But now I could not forget her face. Always it was her. I made the decision to follow her last week. I drove to Morton Road, where I could see the section she always strolled after leaving work early. I watched and waited. She showed there at 6:17 p.m., emerging from the trees as though she had come straight out of the forest. She began to walk, and I gently followed in my car, keeping far enough behind so she couldn't hear my engine. After precisely half a mile of walking, she turned off the road and returned to the woods. Using the lighting on my phone to see through the darkening woods, I parked and followed on foot. I forced my way through the bushes, going in the direction she had taken, even though there was no path or indication that anyone had gone this way. I discovered an empty clearing. Nothing, no sound, no indication of her. Only the descending darkness, naked trees, and falling leaves. My voice echoed back to me as I screamed out, but nobody answered. Upon returning to my vehicle, I discovered a leaf carefully positioned beneath the wiper blade on my windshield. Unlike all the others that were strewn across the road, it was still green at the margins and was fresh, and a single word soon appeared inscribed on it in what appeared to be mud or dirt. I have no idea what that means. She's always there now, but I'm not sure what she wants. Wearing that brown coat, I'm always staring everywhere I go, at the grocery store, at the gas station, and outside my building when I go home from work. She also walks along Morton Road every evening without fail. She now looks over to watch my car pass as I go by, though, and my street is getting closer and closer to the place where she walks. She was standing on the corner last night at the stood in the dark at the end of my street, observing my building. She was 3 houses closer tonight. These days, I keep my doors locked. I know it makes no difference, but I check the windows before going to bed. Whatever she desires, or this is, it will happen, because she was standing exactly across the street, in front of my building, when I glanced out my window at midnight tonight. She was also no longer walking. She had that brown coat on, and was just standing there looking up at my window, patiently waiting, still as a statue, patiently waiting, still as a statue, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. I live alone. It's the type of area where you can open your windows in October to enjoy the crisp fall air without having to worry about much. I have a set work schedule. At 7:45 a.m. they left the house, arrive home at 6 p.m. Additionally, I've always been a habitual person. Before I go, I have coffee and turn off all lights except the porch light, double check and lock the door. I'd been living here for 3 years, and every day has been the same. I told myself I was being forgetful the first time I realized something wasn't right. In late September, it was a Thursday, and my kitchen window was open when I got home from work. Wide open, pulled up as far as it would go, rather than the way I'd left it that morning, cracked about 3 inches for air. Staring at it, I tried to recall whether I had widened it before I departed. Perhaps I had. Perhaps I had opened it without thinking since I was running late. I shut it and didn't give it any more thought until Tuesday of the following week, when I discovered my living room window completely open, with the screen still in place and the drapes fluttering in the wind. In particular, I recalled that morning it had been cold below 50, therefore I had closed all the windows. I wouldn't have allowed one to remain open. I carefully examined the window frame for evidence that someone had pushed it from the outside, but I couldn't find anything. There are no footsteps, dings, or scratches on the flower bed below. The display was not disturbed. It appeared as though it had been opened from the inside. Before going to bed that night, I made sure to check all the windows and doors. I gave each lock to tests. In a first for me, I even pushed a chair up against the back door. I convinced myself that I wasn't afraid. I was simply being cautious. Most likely, there was a plausible explanation. I discovered a coffee mug on my kitchen counter when I got home on Friday. I knew what it was. I hadn't used it that morning, but it was one of mine from the cupboard over the sink. My work bag had my travel mug, which I had used as usual. It appeared as though someone had placed this mug on the counter, next to the coffee maker, with the intention of using it. As I looked around the remainder of the home, my hands began to shake. Nothing else appeared to be disturbed. There were no muddy footsteps, missing objects, indications of forced entry, or overt traces of human presence. The mug was the only item carefully set on the counter. I attempted to explain it. Perhaps I had forgotten, had taken it out the previous evening. Perhaps I had been operating automatically that morning, and failed to recall. However, my conviction that I hadn't touched that mug in weeks grew stronger as I gave it more thought. Before I left for work, I began to take photos. Images showing how I left everything, with doors secured, windows closed, and objects stacked on countertops. When I arrived home, I compared the photos to what I had discovered. I needed to know if I was going crazy or if something was truly happening. Even though it felt paranoid, everything matched for a week. The house was just how I had left it. I began to calm down and considered the possibility that I had simply been forgetful in the past and that my paranoia was a result of the stress of my job. Then, on a Wednesday in early October, I returned home to find everything just as I had left it. That's right. Exactly. The issue was that I had purposefully placed a book at a slight tilt on my coffee table that morning. I had been rushing, so the corner was dangling off the edge. It was a small element that caught my attention as I hurried out the door. I hadn't taken a picture of it. However, the book was precisely centered on the table when I got home. It had been shifted. It had been straightened by someone. I looked at my photos. Other than that, nothing changed. Everything in the kitchen, including the windows and doors, was exactly where I had left it. In that book, however, someone had visited my home and made an effort to keep everything undisturbed. They had likely checked my photos to ensure that everything was put back correctly, but they had overlooked the one little detail I hadn't recorded. I was ill. I went through each area in search of additional signs or minor adjustments. The closet door in my bedroom was slightly ajar. Every time I closed it all the way, my towel was hanging on the incorrect side of the restroom rack. Little things that are invisible unless you seek for them. My residence had been visited by someone who was familiar with my routine, knew when I would be gone, knew how to make everything appear undisturbed, and had been examining my photos or phone to determine what needed to be replaced. However, how? I looked at every window and lock. Everything was safe. I checked the artificial rock by the garden, under the mat, and 4 concealed keys. Nothing. The keys on my keychain and the spare I kept in my work desk were the only keys to my home. I changed all the locks that evening. I had a locksmith come out right away when I called. The emergency charge didn't matter to them. Everything is new, including the window locks and deadbolts. After that, I felt more secure. It seemed as though perhaps I had found a solution. My key would no longer operate if someone had managed to obtain a copy of it. I discovered a brand new coffee mug on my counter when I got home the following day. Not like the first one. This one, a gift from years ago that I had saved out of courtesy, had been in the back of my cupboard and was never used. There was a tea bag next to it as it sat on the counter, beside the mug, not in it, as if someone had been disturbed while preparing tea. My latest nothing had mattered about locks. That night, I searched everywhere for cameras, microphones, or anything else that would help explain how someone was so familiar with my routine. I discovered nothing. I studied forums on home security, looked up guidance online, and discovered things I had never thought of before. According to one post, someone may have been residing in my crawl space or attic and emerging throughout the day while I was away. That night, I made myself investigate the attic. After 10 minutes of gathering bravery at the bottom of the pull-down steps, I used my phone flashlight to climb up. Other than the crates I had kept there, the area was deserted, untouched insulation and dust. No indication that anyone had visited. It was the same in the crawl space, dusty, empty, and obviously disused. However, someone was entering, someone who understood just how long they had and when I would be gone. Precisely what should not be disturbed. I began to change up my regimen. On certain days, I would check the house unexpectedly after returning home for lunch. I would abruptly leave work early, arrive home at 4 p.m. rather than 6 p.m. before going inside. I would slip out the back door and creep around to look in my windows. Nothing. The house was never occupied. On the days I returned home early, nothing disturbed. However, the symptoms persisted on the days I adhered to my regular routine. A chair shifted a little. A new page opened in a book. The thermostat shifted by 2 degrees. Little things are always little. It was always enough to inform me that someone had visited. I directed an inexpensive camera that I had ordered online at my living room. The first day I looked at it during my lunch break, using my phone to view the still empty room. Nothing changed. The feed abruptly stopped working at 2:30 p.m. and simply turned black. The camera was unplugged and the cord was neatly wrapped on the shelf next to it when I arrived home. 2 weeks have passed since then. I've been spending some nights at motels and some nights at friends' homes. Amidst all of this, I am unable to sell the house. Who would purchase that? I wonder. And a part of me thinks that since what's occurring in my house isn't the worst aspect, selling it wouldn't matter. What's going on everywhere else is the worst. I stayed at a hotel across town last week, kept it a secret, where I was heading, paid with cash. There was a coffee mug on the desk of the motel room when I woke up, not the hotel provided paper cups. One of my ceramic mugs from the kitchen. The handle had a chip that I recognized. I stayed at my sister's house 3 days ago. She lives in a different town 30 meters distant. On her couch, I slept. I discovered my toothbrush in the holder when I went to use her restroom in the morning. My household toothbrush. My sister is adamant that she did not place it there. When I asked her about it, she gave me a weird expression. Everything was usual yesterday, when I returned home in the middle of the day and unexpectedly burst through the door. I had left everything precisely as I had left it. However, a note in unfamiliar handwriting was resting on my coffee table. I know you know, it said. Just 4 words, nothing more. I no longer reside at my home. I'm not here for long. I continue to move and change places, yet it makes no difference. I woke up this morning with a coffee mug in my cup holder while I was parked at a rest area 40 meters from my house. Clean and empty, but unquestionably mine. I counted all of my mugs before I left yesterday, so I know. At the time, I was without one. I can see where it went now. I have no idea what they desire. I have no idea who they are, what they're doing, or why they choose me. I'm not sure if this is a sign of anything worse or if they're just trying to frighten me. I just know that someone is more familiar with my routine than I am. Someone has been in my sister's restroom, in my car, while I'm sleepy. In my car, while I'm sleepy. In an effort to save money during the surge in petrol prices in late September, Derek and I began carpooling. Someone had put a ride-sharing request on the business bulletin board, and he worked on a separate floor of my office building. We shared the same timetable, and his route passed my street directly. It looked like a simple method to save $50 per week. The initial rides were typical. We would casually discuss the weather, traffic, and work. He always arrived on schedule, waited in the parking lot at precisely 5:30 p.m., was quiet, a little uneasy, but courteous. His vehicle, a mid-sized sedan that appeared to have recently been detailed, was spotless. Even though he claimed to have owned it for 3 years, it still smelled like a brand new automobile. Up until the second week of October, the rides were good. However, he took a different way home. He said, "There's construction on Maple," when I inquired about it. "This way's faster." It didn't feel any quicker. We navigated through residential streets that I was unfamiliar with, then into a 2-lane road that wound through farmland, the kind where you would see no other cars for miles, as full fields sprawled out on each side. Everything was bathed in that lovely, but lonesome golden orange light as the sun was sinking. I tried not to seem too serious when I said, "I don't think I've been out this way before." Derek remarked, "I know all the back roads, spent years behind the wheel of them. If you know where to go, you can avoid nearly all of the traffic." We did arrive home sooner. In fact, I was taken aback when we arrived at my street just 25 minutes after I left work 5 minutes earlier than normal. I didn't question it, therefore, when he went the same way the following day. The following day, however, he chose a different detour, then another one the next day. Every time, he would explain that there would be an accident, traffic, or construction ahead. Every time, we would go through more remote locations, past deserted farms and barns, where the fall foliage pressed against the road, and the light appeared to go out sooner than it should. One day, in an attempt to lighten the situation, I quipped that you truly do know every back road. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but something about those drives had begun to unnerve me, especially in the fall. He continued, "I enjoy driving around. On the weekends, I go exploring a lot." My skin pricked at the way he said it. but I told myself I was being silly. All he was a peaceful man who enjoyed beautiful roads. That was perfectly okay. He then slowed down when he passed an ancient farmhouse that was set back from the road one evening in late October. It was obviously deserted, with damaged windows, a crumbling porch, and falling leaves and overgrown grass all around. With his hands gripping the driving wheel tightly, he gazed at it while we crawled by. "You okay?" I inquired. He was silent for a long time. "Then there was a person I knew who lived there. I apologize. I didn't intend to. Everything is all right." We didn't speak the rest of the way home since he accelerated abruptly. He arrived at my curb 15 minutes early the following morning. I was still finishing my coffee and wasn't ready when I caught a glimpse of his car through the glass. I apologized for keeping him waiting as I quickly gathered my belongings and left. "I won't keep you waiting," he said. I arrived early, wanted to confirm that we had enough time. "What is the time for?" "It's time to go the way I want to go." We were already backing away from the curb, but there was something about the way he stated that made my stomach turn. I urged myself to get over my paranoia. He was referring to traffic avoidance time. That was all. He did, however, take the longest path yet that day. We passed the same abandoned farmhouse from the previous day as we twisted our way down back roads that I was positive we didn't need to go. I saw that he had been counting under his breath this time as he slowed down and stared at it. "Derek, I have some errands to run tonight," I claimed. "Could we take the direct route home?" He stated. This is the direct route, which was obviously untrue. The distance between us was miles. I tried to sound solid as I said, "I mean the highway. I avoid using the roadway." He spoke in a bland tone. "Final. There are too many cameras." I realized then that something was seriously off. I took out my phone and pretended to check my messages, but in reality, I was using it to track our location by bringing up a map. Despite taking a route that added 20 needless minutes and passed through progressively isolated locations, we were at least moving in the right general direction. I was glad to see my street when he finally dropped me off. I gave him a little thank you and entered, trembling as I bolted the door. I made the decision that evening to inform him the following day that I had secured a new carpool arrangement. It would get me, because it was a simple falsehood, out of those awkward rides without any conflict. However, his car was parked across the street when I woke up the following morning and peered out my window. An hour before our regular departure time, at 6:45 a.m., I observed him sitting in his car in front of my house, immobile. From behind the curtain, "Hey, I'm actually not feeling well today." I texted him, "I'm working from home." His car pulled away 5 minutes after he didn't answer. I didn't work from house. I got ready, contacted a ride-sharing service, and took that route to work. I stayed away from Derek the entire day, used the stairs rather than the elevator, and departed early using a side exit. A note, penned in perfect block letters, was tucked in my front door when I arrived home that evening. "Today, you weren't at work." My blood froze. He was aware. He had made sure. I texted him to say I wasn't there, but he had seen me. I was prepared to face him the following morning and let him know unequivocally that I had found another arrangement. However, his car was back outside when I went to wait for my ride service. He rolled the window down. "Get in," he said. "We're going to be late." "Derek, I discovered another. I am aware that yesterday you went on another ride." "Enter. We're sharing a car." That is what we decided. Something was in his voice that made me afraid to quarrel with him in public and to cause a commotion. We worked in the same building. It was daytime, and I assured myself that I would be secure in the car. During the journey, I would inform him that today was the last day, but I couldn't get myself to say it once I was in the car. He took another back road and drove quietly. Even more remote than the others is this one. Here, the autumn trees were dense, their branches creating a tunnel across the road, and the fallen leaves obscured the line between the shoulder and the pavement. "Where are we heading, Derek?" "Work," he said. "Just going down a path I haven't yet shown you." "I think you'll enjoy this one," he said, disrupting the conversation. "I have something I would want to show you." On a dirt road he turned. A real dirt road that winds into the woods and isn't paved. This has nothing to do with work. Not even close to any sensible path. Stop the automobile. Derek, we're nearly there. Now stop the automobile or I'll call someone. After putting the car in park and stopping onto the shoulder, he turned to face me. His face was inscrutable and blank. Who will you contact? He inquired. What will you say to them? That I take a shortcut. Something I wanted to show you. He was correct, and it got worse because of that. How would I respond? That a co-worker who took odd routes terrified me. That he had parked too early outside my house. It didn't sound like a true emergency. I said, I want to walk from here. I'll find a method to get to work on my own. We're on a private road, 15 miles from anywhere, he remarked. After hours of trekking, you would return me to the main road. We gazed at one another for an extended period of time. Then he grinned, and I had never seen him smile before. His eyes were not reached. Okay, he replied. All right, I apologize. I didn't intend to frighten you. These back roads simply appeal to me, and I figured you may too. You know, the full hues, but I get it. I'll drive you to work. Straight path, I swear. He reversed the vehicle and took us back to the main road before heading directly to work. No remarks, no detours. When he dropped me off, he was quite courteous. He never rode with me again. That night, in a succinct and businesslike text, I informed him that I had made alternative plans. Understood was his one word of response. That seemed to be the end of it. However, I got lost 2 weeks later as I was driving myself home from work. My normal route was blocked by construction, and the detour signs took me down unfamiliar routes. I was traveling through uncharted terrain with my GPS. I was on one of Derek's back roads when I became aware of my whereabouts. The farmhouse was deserted, but I knew it. The way the trees huddled close above, I knew the bend leading to that dusty road up ahead. Then, directly in front of me, I noticed his car parked on the shoulder, empty. With my heart racing, I reduced my speed in search of him. There were deep shadows and a lot of autumn leaf on the trees. I was unable to see anyone. As I slowly passed his car, I kept an eye on it in my rearview mirror, hoping he would emerge from the woods and cross the street. But he didn't. In the last of the October light, his automobile sat there on that desolate back road. Upon arriving home, I discovered a printed map with a route marked in yellow marker, hidden beneath my windshield wiper. Yellow marker, hidden beneath my windshield wiper. Early in October, when the neighborhood was at its most picturesque, I moved into the duplex. The left unit, which was my side, had just been painted and had a little porch where I could sit and observe the falling leaves. The landlord claimed that the right side had been vacant for a month, but someone was moving in that the same weekend. I reasoned that having a neighbor would be pleasant, since it would allow us to share the expense of maintaining the grass and perhaps engage in occasional conversation. On my second day there, I met him. I went to introduce myself as he was unloading boxes from a truck. Colin was his name. He was in his mid-30s, of average height, and amiable enough. We engaged in small talk about the landlord, the neighborhood, and other common topics. He appeared normal, perhaps a touch quiet, but nothing that would raise suspicions. The wreath caught my attention right away. The first weekend, I had a full wreath on my door, one of those ornamental ones with little pumpkins and foliage made of fabric. Colin placed the identical wreath on his door 2 days later. Everything is the same, including the colors and design. As I was heading to work, I became aware of it. When I noticed it, I did a double take. I persuaded myself that although it felt a little funny, it wasn't that bad. Perhaps he had liked mine when he saw it. Went to the same shop and purchased one. It's not as if I created it myself. People's tastes are similar. It occurs. Then I placed an internet purchase for a doormat featuring a straightforward grey and white welcome pattern. I placed it in front of my door when it arrived. Colin had exactly the same doormat 3 days later. I felt the jolt of uneasiness once more as I stood on my doorstep and stared at it. That night, I on his side of the duplex, he heard him. Because the walls were so thin, I could occasionally hear things moving and footsteps. Then I heard another sound. My voice. Muted, but unmistakably mine. I listened with my ear to the wall. The video he was playing was a dumb footage of me attempting to explain how to make pumpkin bread that I had shared on social media, perhaps a year prior. He had it somehow, but I erased it months ago since I felt it was embarrassing. I listened to my own voice as I stood motionless, through the wall, discussing oven tongue and nutmeg and cinnamon. It then came to a halt. There was silence, and I heard footsteps. That evening, I went through my privacy settings, checked my social media accounts, and made everything that wasn't already private. I also looked at Colin's profiles, but he was hardly active on the internet. A Facebook page with no updates, a few old pictures, nothing current, and no information about his identity or professional background. I discovered him seated in a chair that was exactly like mine on his porch the following morning. Same fashion, same hue, placed in the exact same location on his porch as mine. The coffee mug he was carrying resembled the one I'd been sipping from 10 minutes before. "Morning," he yelled as he noticed my intense gaze. "It was morning," I said. "I like your chair, thank you. I thought yours looked comfortable when I saw it. Your taste is good." I couldn't say anything that would seem accusing or paranoid. I simply grinned and headed to my car. I was unable to concentrate at work. I couldn't stop thinking about the doormat, the chair, the wreath, and the film he had been playing of me. Each item could be explained separately, but when combined, they created a pattern that made my skin crawl. Colin's car was in the driveway when I arrived home that evening. He had never driven a car like that before. This one was only a year newer than mine, but it had the same make, model, and color. For a long time, I sat in my car and stared at his, while my heart raced. This was no accident. Purchasing the same vehicle as your neighbor is not a coincidence. I went inside as soon as I moved in next to them, locked my door, and closed the curtains. His movements on his side of the duplex were audible to me. Footsteps above me. My bedroom was right over his. It sounded like he was moving furniture around. I listened while lying in bed that night. I heard him moving about upstairs at around midnight, from the bed to the window, from the window to the closet, and from the closet to the door. The same pattern of steps was repeated. I took the same path in my own bedroom. My layout was being mirrored by him. Saturday was the following day. I made the decision to try something. Wearing a blue jacket that I didn't often wear, I headed outside to my car, visited a coffee establishment that I had never been to before. An hour later, when I returned, Colin was just coming into the driveway with a cup from the same coffee shop and a blue jacket that looked exactly like mine. He smiled and waved when he noticed my intense gaze. I didn't return the wave. Trying to determine what to do, I went inside and sat on my couch. What was there for me to say? What should I report? That I shared my neighbor's taste, that the same stores he frequented. It was all legal. It felt frightening, even though none of it was in a legal sense. He seemed to be observing me, imitating me, and attempting to become me. I began to purposefully test him. I purchased a mother plant in an uncommon shade of burgundy for my porch. He had the same plant in the same pot 2 days later. I switched to a yellow bulb for my porch light. The following day, he modified his. I hung a little ornamental flag with leaves for fall. In less than 48 hours, he raised the same flag. He imitated everything I did. A day or two later every time. Always precise. I never saw him out when I was out, despite my best efforts to catch him following me. When I drove, I would look in my mirrors, but he was never in the back. I would search stores for him, but he was never present. Even though I never saw him, he was somehow able to find out what I bought, where I went, and what I did. Then it occurred to me that he might be following my vehicle. I looked for GPS gadgets, but I couldn't find any. Though I had no idea how that would even happen, I worried if he had somehow hacked or cloned my phone. The level of copying increased. He began to dress like me. The following day, he would be wearing a grey sweater, just as I would. Both he and I would wear boots. 3 days after I trimmed my hair shorter, he did the same. It felt like I was staring into a warped mirror, a slightly skewed reflection of myself. I no longer went outside until absolutely necessary. To avoid seeing him, I began parking in the back rather than the driveway. Even though I kept my curtains drawn and stayed off my porch, I could still hear him over the walls. He was still there, duplicating, mirroring, and matching whatever I did on the other side of the duplex. I overheard him conversing on his side of the wall one evening. At first, I couldn't make out words, but then I understood that he was speaking with someone on the phone, and he was introducing himself by my name, providing my information, including my background and job. I listened to him impersonate me while pressing my ear against the wall. He changed the pitch of his voice to sound more like mine, yet it was still recognizable as his own. I heard him giggle when he hung up. It was a chilly, contented laugh, not your typical one. The following day, I called the landlord and informed him that I had found another place and that I needed to terminate my lease. He was not content, began discussing penalties and defeat, deposits. I didn't give a damn. I'd be willing to pay anything to leave. However, when I got home from work that evening, I discovered an envelope hidden beneath my door. A copy of my side of the duplex's lease application, which was submitted 6 months prior to my move-in, was found inside. It was filled out in Colin's handwriting, but underneath was a note written in the same handwriting, along with my name, information, and signature, or a very close imitation of it. I arrived first. I asked the landlord. He showed me my original application with my real signature on it and verified that I had moved in 2 months prior, with Colin having moved in after me. It was clear that the document Colin had hidden under my door was a fake. Why make it, though? What did he want me to know? I also observed more missing items that week. A parking receipt, an old coffee cup, a pair of sunglasses, and small items from my car. Nothing of value, only personal belongings that identified me and served as a reminder of my existence. Additionally, I began to see them on Colin's side. By way of the window, I would see small bits of my life moving into his territory, like my coffee cup on his doorstep or my sunglasses on his dash. I just packed up what I could fit in my car, paid the penalty, and left the most of my furniture behind when I moved out 3 weeks ago. I recently moved to a new apartment on the 3rd story in a safe building across town. No neighbors are visible from my door, and there are no shared walls. However, I noticed a moving truck in the parking lot last week. As I glanced out my window, I noticed Colin pointing up at the building while guiding the movers. In my building, yesterday, I checked with the office, asked casually if my floor would be receiving any new tenants. Yes, the manager replied. The apartment at the end of my hall had recently had a lease signed by a man named Colin. I discovered a grey and white welcome mat with the word welcome printed on it outside my door this morning. It wasn't there by me, and as I was about to discard it, I noticed that the door at the end of the hall had a burgundy mother in a pot, a full wreath, and th. Was aware. In the first week of October, I adopted Max from the county shelter. 4 months. I had been considering getting a dog ever since I took up residence in my home. However, I continued to put it off. When I drove by the shelter one Saturday afternoon, I made the decision to simply enter and have a look, just seeking, no commitment. Max, a medium-sized mixed breed with brown fur and sharp eyes, was in the 3rd kennel from the end. According to the shelter employee, he had been there for 2 weeks when he was discovered roaming close to the highway. No microchip, no collar, and no means to find out where he'd come from. They estimated that he was abandoned and around 3 years old. He sat down as soon as I walked up to his kennel and put his paw between the bars. The employee claimed that he had received training, really good training, understands every fundamental command. He spent a lot of time with whoever had him previously. That ought to have been the first indication that something wasn't right. Well-trained dogs aren't simply abandoned. However, I was enchanted by his composed manner and the way he gazed at me as though he had been waiting for me. That following day, I brought him home after completing the necessary paperwork. Within an hour of having him home, the first odd event occurred. I let him run loose in my living room, figuring he would sniff about, explore, and get acquainted with a new area, like all dogs do. Max didn't explore, though. He proceeded straight to the kitchen, took a seat in front of the cabinet that held the dog bowls I had purchased that morning, and waited. I gazed at him while I stood there. He could not possibly have known the location of the bowls. I had simply purchased them on that day and placed them in that cupboard 20 minutes prior to my departure for the shelter. It didn't even appear like dog supplies would be in the cabinet, like the other 5 lower cabinets in my kitchen. It was simply a regular one. In an attempt to persuade myself, I exclaimed out loud, "Lucky guess." I pulled out a bowl and poured water into it. After taking a quiet drink, Max went to the back door and sat down to wait to be released. A little fenced yard is accessible from my back door. Max headed straight to the back left corner after walking outside, the one area where the fence is open, and carefully sniffed at it. He then went back to the entrance and awaited re-entry. He seemed to know my yard, the location of the fence's weak spots, and the layout of my house as if he had been there before. I saw him walk around the rooms that evening. He never ran into objects or cautiously explored, as a dog might in a strange setting. He moved with familiarity and purpose. He walked straight upstairs and lay down on the rug next to my bed when it was time to go to sleep. The precise location where, although I hadn't purchased one yet, I had considered installing a dog bed. I attempted to explain it. Perhaps my house was laid out similarly to his old one. Perhaps he was simply a quick adapting smart dog. But I was really uneasy as I lay there in the dark and listened to him breathe. I made the decision to test him the following morning. I yelled out familiar commands, such as sit and stay and come. He complied with them all flawlessly. Then I made an odd attempt. "Max, visit the I have a finished basement that has a kitchen door. Since moving here, I had only gone down there once to inspect the furnace." Max rose, went to the kitchen, and took a seat beside the cellar door. I felt sick to my stomach. He descended the steps without hesitation, as if he had done it 100 times before. As soon as I opened the door, he was sitting in the corner where I kept the storage boxes I hadn't yet unpacked, and I followed him down. He sat there calmly, as if he were demonstrating something to me. "Good boy," I said in a tremulous voice. With my head spinning, I gave him a treat and escorted him back upstairs. I contacted the shelter that afternoon to inquire for any additional details regarding Max's whereabouts. After looking through the documents, the employee provided me a location, a remote place roughly 15 miles from my home. "Before he was apprehended," she said, "someone had called to report seeing a dog that fit Max's description walking around for a few days. However, this is what chilled me to the bone. The dates were illogical. 3 weeks prior to his arrival at the shelter, the initial sighting was reported. Additionally, based on the timestamps, those observations were during the week that I was relocating to my new home. I began searching for proof that someone had visited my home prior to my move-in. According to the landlord, the apartment had been vacant and had been cleaned when the last tenant left a month before I moved there. Upon closer inspection, however, I began to discover items, little stuff. There was a brown dog hair, similar to Max's fur, on the basement stairs. There was a worn area where something heavy had repeatedly rested on the rug next to my bed. The rear door has scratches on it that just as tall as Max's paws. A dog that resembled Max had been in my home with someone. The house was intended to be vacant during that period. I looked for evidence of forced entry and examined the locks, but everything appeared to be secure. The landlord informed me that the locks had been switched between tenants, but I nevertheless changed them. There was nothing else for several days. Max was a well-behaved, quiet, and obedient dog. However, I couldn't get rid of the impression that he was too flawless and well-versed in everything, and those were all I could think about. He had been hanging around my house for 3 weeks while I was moving in. Next, I located the collar. I had inherited some holiday decorations from the previous tenant, and everything was in a box in my basement. I discovered the extension cord at the bottom of the package when searching for it. A name tag attached to a brown leather dog collar. Max was the name on the tag. However, it wasn't my address that was etched on the back. About 30 miles away. It was for a house. I took a seat in the basement, attempting to make sense of everything while holding the collar on the floor. Had Max, the former tenant's dog, been present? Had I just happened to adopt a dog after he ended up at the shelter? That night, I took a car to the address. It was a modest home or a peaceful neighborhood, just like mine in terms of size and design. A woman in her 60s answered the door when I knocked. "I'm sorry to trouble you," I continued, "but this collar was on my adopted dog. The address is as follows." She cut in, looking perplexed. "We haven't had a dog in 5 years. Not since the death of our Max. How was his collar obtained?" I described how I discovered it in my basement. She claimed to have sent Max's belongings to a shelter years prior, and to be perplexed as to how his collar got into my home. She paled as I showed her my Max's photo. "That isn't feasible," she stated. "Our Max looks just like that." That's right. I was much more perplexed when I left. Max was waiting for me by the front window when I arrived home, as if he always knew when I would arrive, even if I arrived at an odd hour. I installed a camera in my living room that evening. When I wasn't home, I had to know what Max did. I viewed the camera feed a few times during the day before leaving for work the following morning. Max slept on the couch most of the time. However, at 2:17 p.m., he stood up and made his way to the front entrance. He stared at it for 3 minutes while he sat there. He then proceeded to the rear entrance and followed the same procedure. Then he went back to the sofa. I felt nauseous as I looked at the timestamp. I was standing outside in the parking lot at work at 2:17 p.m., debating whether to leave early because I wasn't feeling good. I had spent roughly 3 minutes standing there, then made the decision to remain. Max had gone back to the couch at the very time I'd made that choice. How was he aware? How could he have known that I was considering returning home? I began to purposefully test him. Max would be waiting at the basement door before I moved. If I were to consider going there, he would be at the front door with his leash before I had even gotten out of bed if I thought about bringing him for a stroll. He seemed to be able to read my thoughts, or had been trained to predict every action I would do. A week later, however, the worst revelation was made. Something caught my attention in the background when I was watching the video and comparing the various days. A shadow could be seen in the window in a few of the pictures, someone gazing in from outside. They spent hours merely observing, but the figure was too hazy to recognize. Max also never alerted me or barked. He carried on with his daily activities as if the person observing were entirely normal. I watched more of the video. On several occasions, the shadow would show up in the afternoon and would always observe from the same location in my yard. I discovered a message in my mailbox last week. It was written by hand without an envelope on plain paper. "Max is doing well," it said. "I appreciate you looking after him." That house was always his home. I informed them about the note, the collar, and the shadow in the video and filed a report. They stated that nothing criminal had happened, but they will investigate. They couldn't act on any threats, break-ins, or stalking evidence, but I am aware of a problem. Max was trained especially for me and my house by someone I know. Someone who was aware that I would choose him, knew I would go to that shelter. Someone who has been observing me, researching me, and organizing tea. While I was at work on a Tuesday in late September, the first item arrived and was placed on my doorstep. I was the recipient of a little, simple brown cardboard package with a delivery label. It wasn't odd, but there was no return address. I frequently place internet orders, and occasionally smaller suppliers don't have return policies. Without giving it much thought, I carried it inside and opened it. There was a scarf inside. Soft wool in rich crimson and burnt orange, autumnal hues. Actually, I thought I might have ordered it weeks ago and forgotten about it, but it was really lovely. I checked my credit card statements, my order history on all websites I use, and my email for confirmations. Nothing. No documentation of buying any scar. Perhaps it was a gift, I thought. However, Neither my friends nor relatives remembered sending me anything, and there was no card, letter, or indication of who had sent it. I assumed it must have been a shipment problem, where some algorithm had messed up addresses. After jokingly asking in group messaging, I forgot about it after putting it in my closet. Packages continued to arrive every few days. One more package, a high school textbook with sections highlighted, just the way I would have. A cup from a summer camp it closed 20 years ago, although I had gone there as a child. A picture of my childhood home taken from a perspective that only I would recall. An item from a restaurant where I had my first data keychain. A long-on place. Every item demonstrated that someone had been observing for a considerable amount of time. New details about me that I could hardly recall. I took a long break from opening them. In my extra room, I simply heaped them. However, it was terrible not knowing. I would always tear through the tape late at night with trembling hands, whether it was a recipe card written by my grandmother, or a pressed flower from a wedding bouquet, or something so similar that I couldn't tell, like a tiny stone from a beach I'd been to by myself 7 years prior, or a stone I'd picked up and tossed back into the water. I felt nauseous after that final one. How could anyone be aware of that particular moment? Someone knew that I had been by myself, hadn't taken any photos, and hadn't notified anyone. There had been a visitor. The frequency of package arrivals increased from daily to every other day. My spare room was occupied, with boxes piled up against the wall, a memorial to my life being categorized and given back to me in bits and pieces. However, roughly 2 weeks ago, I opened one. I was forced to. It demanded to be opened because it was heavier and bigger than the others. There were dozens of photos inside, images of me going about my everyday activities, such as waiting in line at the grocery store, walking to my car, or sitting in a coffee shop. Recent images from the previous few months, as well as older pictures from years ago, from locations I had previously lived and worked at. Jobs someone I'd never seen or noticed had created a timeline of my life. There was always another person in the background of each picture, always far enough away to be marginally out of focus, but it was always the same person, just standing there in the backdrop of my existence, observing, with the same dark jacket, the same build, and the same posture. On my phone, I browsed through old pictures of myself, taken over the years, including selfies, photos of locations I'd been, and pictures of food I'd consumed. Additionally, there are a lot of them in the background, that same figure that is constantly looking and far away, constantly present. Why hadn't I noticed? From then on, I opened more of the packages in a panic, searching for answers. However, there were just additional items, recollections, and evidence of my extensive surveillance. A napkin from a restaurant where I had eaten by myself the previous month, a receipt for something I had bought, a piece of mail that ought to have been discarded. I can clearly recall placing something in my recycling bin a few weeks prior. My garbage was being rummaged. I had a follower. 4 years. Someone had been recording every detail of my life. They were now returning everything to me in bits and pieces, as though they were constructing a case, narrating a tale, or establishing a point. However, what exactly did they desire? Yesterday's delivery was unusual. It was lighter and smaller. One piece of neatly folded paper was inside. Upon unfolding it, I discovered a list of dates, times, and locations printed in typed text. It was a moment before I realized what I was seeing. I moved in these ways during the previous month. Every location I had visited, every time I had left and returned from my home, every detour I had taken, and every store I had visited were meticulously recorded, down to the exact minute. I know everything is written in one line at the bottom of the page. Everything has always been known to me. After that, you'll quickly comprehend. Another package this morning. I nearly forgot to open it, knowing that whatever was inside would be something I didn't want to see. I stood in my living room holding it and feeling its weight. I had to know, so I opened it nevertheless. There was a key inside. A simple brass key with a little paper tag fastened. An address on the tag. An address. I rarely visit a part of town that I don't recognize. Everything is waiting for you here, beneath the address. Come take a look at my creation. What's at that address is unknown to me. I'm not sure if I should show up or go. Anybody. If I should disregard it entirely. But all those shipments, all those items from my life, all those situations that someone saw and recorded are still on my mind. What have they been constructing at that address? What awaits me? Now the leaves are nearly gone. As the fall draws to a close, I can't stop looking at that key, wondering what room or door it goes to, and whether I'll find answers there or something worse. Because the person mailing these gifts hasn't threatened me or expressed a desire to harm me. They have repeatedly demonstrated to me that they are aware of me, that they have been observing me, and that I have never been by myself. And perhaps that's the idea. Perhaps what they might do isn't the most frightening aspect. They have already done it, watched my entire life without my knowledge, gathered all of my parts. They are now returning everything. However, why? What do they want to get out of me? Lastly, I received a notification on my phone at night. A package is on its way to the recipient, expected to arrive today. I have been sitting here waiting for my front door to open. I must comprehend. So even though I don't want to, I shall examine what's inside. I need to know how long this has been going on, who is doing it, and why. Just now, the doorbell rang. There's a package on my doorstep. It's larger than the others. Additionally, there is a marker written item on the box that I don't identify, but that somehow seems familiar. For now, it says the last one. I'm not sure if I ought to open it. However, they are aware that I will, so I already know I will. They've known all along. You know I will. They've known all along. She motioned for me to place my map beside hers, made me feel comfortable, and introduced me to a few regulars. It was considerate, even compassionate, but suddenly I became aware of things. I had spotted a brochure about joining a book club at the community centre, but I hadn't told anyone about it. Sarah was present at the first meeting that I attended. She exclaimed, "Oh my God, what a small world," with real amazement on her face. I only joined a month ago. I enrolled in a workshop on photography for the weekend. The class included Sarah. I've always wanted to learn how to take pictures. Isn't this great? She asked. I began doing Saturday morning volunteer work at the neighborhood food bank. Sarah showed up on the third Saturday I was there. I've been volunteering here for a while, she stated. I used to work the Wednesday shift, but I started working the Saturday shift instead. This is far superior. Every time, she had a reason. Every time, it was believable. But as the coincidences accumulated, I began to get worried. I tried to shrug it off when I brought it up to a colleague. I seem to run across this woman everywhere I go. She seems to be following me. My colleague inquired as to whether I had shared anything about these activities on social media. I looked. Sarah could have been following my subtle clues, which included a photo of the community centre brochure, a post asking for book club recommendations, and a comment about wanting to try yoga. For a few weeks, I didn't see Sarah outside of hiking. I stopped sharing about my activities on social media, and I made my accounts more private. Collective, I began to calm down, and began to believe that I had been overly suspicious. Then, while driving home from an errand, I happened upon a brand new eatery across town that I had never heard of before. When I opened the menu and took a seat at a table, I recognized the voice. "Oh my God, you're also present." Sarah was waving at me from the bar. She said, "I love this place," as she approached. "I frequently dine here. Would you like to accompany me?" She grinned and returned to the bar when I made up an explanation about waiting for someone. However, she was also observing me, as I observed her in the mirror behind the bar. She had simply requested water, I discovered. In reality, she wasn't eating there. She simply existed. I discovered a letter on the windshield of my car in the work parking lot the following morning. "You ought to attempt the trekking trail," it advised. "Old Mill Road. This time of year is lovely." As she was aware of my workplace, she was familiar with my car's appearance. She was also writing me notes. I stopped attending to yoga and hiking with the group in an attempt to break whatever pattern Sarah was following. I even took a few weeks off from helping. She was not blocked on social media by me. I completely stopped posting since I was afraid it would make things worse. I didn't see her for 3 weeks. I began to believe that it was finished and that she had moved on after getting the hint. Then one evening she was sitting on my porch steps when I got home from work. As I got closer, she remarked, "I was worried about you," and got to her feet. "You vanished from the world. I simply wanted to check in with you. How are you aware of my residence?" My speech sounded unsteady. "Oh, the one time I drove you home. Do you recall the time your car wouldn't start after the yoga class?" It had never occurred. Never before had my car failed to start. From yoga, we had never carpooled. That didn't happen. Sarah. She tilted her head, seeming perplexed. "It did, indeed. Back in October. You can't recall?" "No, since it never happened." We gazed at one another for a considerable amount of time. Then, while it didn't reach her eyes, she grinned. "I'm here now, though. I wanted to see how you were doing. May I enter? I brought you some tea from your favorite store." I had never mentioned a tea store to her. She had never been invited to my home. I had never provided my address to her. I said, "I need you to go. All I want to do is be a nice buddy. Go now, please." She left, but not before giving me several quick glances as she made her way to her car. She pulled out her phone and seemed to snap a photo of my house with me standing on the porch before she drove off. I went inside, shut all the curtains, and locked everything. I thought I was out of breath. I gave her my number early on when we were planning hikes. Then the following day I blocked her on social media. I believed that would be the conclusion. However, I began to see her everywhere. Gas stations, grocery stores, and restaurants I was dining at all have explanations. I reside close by. How coincidental. I made a record of it. 2 weeks and 15 sightings. However, what could I report? She was just out in public. According to my neighbor, a woman had been stopping by and peering in my windows while I was at work. She said, "You had a friend named her. You're usually home around 6 o'clock. I informed her. Things had been shifted when I got home 2 days earlier. A chair had an unusual angle. A book moved. I had left my kitchen curtain closed, and it opened. It had been occupied by someone. I started staying with a friend and altered my hair. A package that was addressed to me at an address I had never provided to Sarah showed up at my friend's house this morning. There was a photo album with numerous images of me in it. Some were new, while others came via social media. Me walking to my car at work and at stores. Taken over several weeks without my awareness. There was a note on the last page. "A true buddy cannot be avoided. You'll always be in my sights. I'll be there forever." Friends act in this way. She finds me wherever I go. She crosses every line I establish. She has persuaded herself that this is a typical friendship. Or perhaps she's an expert in her field. The leaves are down. The hiking group has finished. Sarah isn't, though. Sometimes I spot her automobile on my friend's street. I always notice her observing in the background. My pal last night received a message and friend request from Sarah. "I miss our hikes. Tell her. I just want to chat. Tell her. Inform her that I will not be leaving. I've never been to this coffee shop, which is 20 meters away." However, I continue to watch the door, anticipating her arrival and exclaiming, "What a coincidence," because she always finds me wherever I go. I'm also coming to the realization that this isn't a friendship. Perhaps it was never. It's about something else, something that will go on until she says it's over. Just now, the door opened. A woman in a well-known jacket entered. Sarah's coat. She's glancing around the room for someone. She will see me. Even though she hasn't yet. She does it every time. Even though she hasn't yet. She does it every time. The packages continued to arrive. They mistake me for someone else. When I changed providers in September, I was given a new phone number. I declined the representative's request to pay more for a clean number that had never been assigned before. It appeared to be a financial waste. Phone numbers are constantly being reused. It was a Thursday night when the first call came in. "It's me," a man's voice said. "We must speak. I think you have the wrong number." Then, "Pause," I said. "Don't accompany me. Not right now." You are aware of the purpose of this. I've never seen this number before. You're attempting to get in touch with someone else. He ended the call. That evening, I received 3 more calls. People who assumed whoever had this number would know them. Different numbers and similar talks. A few became irate. A woman sobbed and pleaded, "Just tell me where you are, please." After 10 seconds of breathing, the other person hung up. I was receiving 8 to 10 calls every day by the end of the first week. The voicemails began, but I stopped answering. Dozens of them. "You cannot hide indefinitely." Another 3 days. "All you have is that. We're done if you don't meet me at the regular location." The signals carried weight I didn't grasp and were ambiguous but persistent. Some sounded frantic, some menacing. Everyone thought I was someone who had made commitments, had debts, and had acted in ways that had repercussions. Then the text began. Hundreds throughout, some in Spanish, some in English, and others just digits that looked like code in the following days. Tuesday was rescheduled to Thursday. Same point of descent. He is posing inquiries. Have you informed them? New numbers started popping up even after I tried blocking them. One voicemail at 2 in the morning. "This isn't hilarious. I'm not sure what game you're playing. People are trying to find you. Serious individuals. I will no longer be able to assist you if you do not reply by Friday." One more. "Your silence is a response. I hope you get the meaning of that." I described the situation to my provider over the phone. They provided a new number at no cost. A part of me needed to comprehend what I had stumbled into, but I nearly took it. I also feared that altering the numbers wouldn't resolve the issue, that these folks would also discover the new number in some way. Mid-October saw an increase in the number of calls. 7 calls in 20 minutes one afternoon. A woman said, "Thursday, 8 p.m., Riverside Park." When I eventually responded, "You are familiar with the location. Don't force me to look for you. There will be repercussions for both of us if you fail to show up." She ended the call. I was not there on Thursday. I felt absurd and remained at home with their doors locked. But they couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was seriously wrong. "There you were not on Friday morning. Why?" Messages grew increasingly hostile over the following days. "You believe you can simply vanish. This is your final caution." Then a local number called on Tuesday night. I replied. A man stated, "I saw you at the grocery store today. You've evolved. Your hair, but I knew who you were." My blood froze. My hair remained the same. "You're looking at the wrong person, really." Since you resemble the picture exactly. Identical build and height. "Which picture?" 3 months ago. The one you sent. I could have been the person he described. Close, so much so that he might have concluded that I was hunting for a certain person if he had spotted me at a store. I checked all the windows after hanging up. No one was there. However, that did not imply that they were absent. I didn't get much sleep that night. I jumped at every sound. I had to look out the window at every automobile that went by. I began to consider this number's prior owner, what they had done, who they were, and why so many people were frantically attempting to contact them. Were they gone? Did they have something to flee? From whom? And now I had inherited their ghosts due to a repurposed phone number. I discovered something the following morning that made matters worse. While perusing a local social media group, I came across a post from 3 weeks prior that sought details about a woman in her mid to early 30s who had last been spotted in the region in August. "If you have any information, kindly get in touch." There was a picture in the post. The person in it might have been me, but it was blurry and taken from a distance. I look the same overall and wear the same clothes, though not exactly the same. I'm near enough that you might mistake me for the person you were seeking for if you saw me. I continued scrolling after taking a screenshot of the post. 2 other posts that were identical were discovered in other communities. A person that fit my overall description was depicted in a variety of blurry or poorly angled photographs. It was around the time I would have received this phone number. In late August and early September, someone was trying to find the former owner, several others, and they continued to search. After all, I changed my phone number. I went through the procedure by calling my provider that afternoon. I was given a new number, and they informed me that it was clean and had never been used before. 5 days have passed since then. I received a text message on my new number this morning from an unknown number. You can't run forever, despite your best efforts. We are aware of your identity. I never gave my new phone number to everyone, but my close friends and family. I didn't post it anyplace. I never made use of it for any services or accounts. These individuals could not have obtained it unless they had never need the phone number, unless they had discovered me in another manner, my face, my automobile, my address, unless, of course, the phone number was the beginning. However, they were now aware of my residence, shopping destinations, and appearance. For the last 2 hours, I have been keeping an eye on my parking lot. Automobile has parked in front of my building 3 times and just sat there. Always the same conduct, different cars, simply sitting and observing. I discovered a letter beneath my windshield wiper this morning, Thursday night at 8 p.m. Park Riverside. Don't let it pass you by. Additionally, indistinct handwriting underneath. We know you'll do, but not her. I have no idea what that implies. I'm not sure what they're looking for or what you'll do. I'm not sure if I should run, hide, or just show up to tell them that I'm not who they believe me to be. But I'm starting to realize that it might not make a difference. A repurposed phone number has dragged me into something, and I'm stuck there. There is a woman out there who resembles me enough for people to confuse us. This number belonged to a woman before me, a woman who never fulfilled her commitments or agreements. I was discovered by everyone searching for a woman who vanished. 2 days remain until Thursday. My phone is buzzing non-stop. Fresh text. Bring the money you owe. No more justifications. I have no debt to anyone. However, try explaining it to those who believe they have finally located the woman they have been searching for months. Once more, my phone starts ringing. An additional unidentified number. One more voicemail. I'll finally give it a listen. All I want is to know who I should have been. And when they find out I'm not her, what will happen? Or worse, out I'm not her. What will happen? Or worse,